Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here at the launch of this event, and I'd like to congratulate the editors and all the authors. As Quentin just said, I'll be briefly presenting the paper that I wrote with some colleagues from ACR, and I'd like to acknowledge them, John Dixon and Ijaz Qureshi. Back in 2011, I was really fortunate that the then US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton came to speak at my work, which is the Food and Agriculture organisation in Rome. And she had a lot to talk about that day because it was a day after the US had killed Osama bin Laden. But she had one really clear message that she wanted to talk about, and that was that food security was the issue of our time. And while I think that this has actually been the issue of all time, I do think it's very timely that we've got this journal special edition and that it's covered, given such a comprehensive treatment to such a critical topic. And just to labour the point, this is an assessment that CSIRO did last year that looks at all the papers on the topic of food security. And you can see since 2008 there's been a really rapid increase from about 250 papers to over 600, noting that the 2014 year is only part. So today I'm going to discuss the role that public policy can play in ensuring food security. I'm going to be providing a brief overview of the multidimensional nature of food security, and today at the lunch event we heard a lot about different sectors and having to work at the nexus of these sectors, which is very much in line with what we're talking about in our paper. I'm going to introduce the framework that we used and provide some take-home messages. So food is a fundamental human right, and enhancing food security doesn't just improve human potential and productivity, but it contributes significantly to social well-being, economic development, and peace and security. And public policies that support the growth in sustainable food systems, from production all the way through the value chain to consumption, are really critical drivers for inclusive economic development and a main pathway for leading hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But in spite of the importance of food security and the progress that we've made in reaching the Millennium Development Goal 1, that of halving the population of hungry people, a staggering 1 in 9, or 805 million, go to bed hungry and malnourished every night. And 98% of those people live in the developing world. And as you can see from this map, which is probably familiar to most of you, this is the 2014 Global Hunger Index map. There are marked differences across the regions. So most regions are showing really increased improvement in food security, with the exception of sub-Saharan Africa, which has the largest concentration of food insecure people. So not 1 in 9, which is the global average, but 1 in 4. And you can see it marked there in the orange, the yellow and the red. And also South Asia, which has the highest overall number of hungry people, currently about 280 million. Now, there are 500 million farmers in the world, and 90% of them are smallholder farmers. And what that means for the Australians in the room is they're operating on very small farms, 1 hectare or less. And they have the responsibility of feeding half the planet. They feed 50% of the world. And so many policies that I'm going to be talking about today are going to be focusing on them. And most of these farmers are women, as we heard today during our lunch talk, who have really limited access to basic technologies, imports, credit, and land. And the FAO estimate that if these women had access to the same technologies that currently exist that men have, they could increase global production by 20 to 30% and feed nearly 150 million extra people. But food security isn't just an agriculture issue. And this map shows the correlation between hunger and water stress and area of conflict outbreaks. So conflict can lead to food and water crises, but food and water crises can also lead to conflict. And many wars and recent conflicts have begun with famines, and the 2014-15 Global Food Policy Report's got a really interesting chapter on this topic. It's a precondition for political stability. Earlier this year, the FAO Director General, Graziano da Silva, attended a special meeting at the UN Peacekeeping Commission in New York, where he said that agriculture and food security must be treated as essential components of peace building and conflict resolution. In the history of humanity, time and time again, we have seen vicious cycles linking violence and hunger, and that these conflicts are not restricted by national borders. So public policies are really critical because market mechanisms just aren't sufficient. They cannot provide the resources that we need all the way along the value chain for producing, storing and distributing food, and nor the institutions and the regulations that we need to underpin an equitable and safe food system. Markets are really good at efficiency, but it's often at the cost of equity. We talked a lot today at lunch about food security and the associated poverty being a multidimensional issue, that it really reaches across a range of sectors and therefore requires a really multidimensional approach to dealing with it. And we talked about how we have to make decisions at the nexus, and that's really underpinning what we're saying in our paper, that integrated public policy mechanisms that are well designed and are delivering multiple goals across various sectors are really what we need to address food security. And finally, there's often a disconnect between what countries think their food policies are delivering and what's actually happening. And a good example of this sort of dilemma, I guess, is rice policy or any commodity policy, where high prices for the producers are being implemented to reduce poverty, but a lot of those producers are also net food buyers and therefore being impacted. Or you can look at it in reverse, where there's low prices for consumers and that's having an issue with the producers. In particular, if farming becomes unproductive, then a lot of the unskilled labourers that work on the farm who are net food consumers are going to be out of work. So it's a very complicated issue, and it's really about the challenge is to raise net farm incomes while lowering consumer prices in a way that doesn't harm the earnings side. So in our paper, we approached food security through the framework that you see here, and we divided it into food demand, food access and food supply. And we looked at it across a range of scales, from global down to local scale and individual. And I just thought I'd highlight just a few examples. So the first one is under food demand is income. Having enough food produced and in the market doesn't guarantee food security. It's really about access to that food, and households need income in order to do that. And they can gain income through their earnings, through their assets, or through transfers like cash transfers or remittances. Policies that can build income and therefore consumptions are, for example, promoting employment off farm, which really sort of creates resilience, especially during seasonal shock periods. Raising net farm incomes and profitability through a range of measures, including, we talked about sustainable intensification and also agricultural diversification, in particular into high-value cash crops, which can also have a nutrition dividend, or raising incomes through social protection measures, which have been shown to be really effective at raising consumption levels, raising local economic development, and also market demand. Looking under food access, a commonly used policy to improve local market access is one such as the school feeding programs that exist. So this is where nutritious food is fed to children, often targeting nutritional gaps in their supply of food at home. But if you look at ones like the Brazilian Food Purchase Program, they're actually linking local producers with the food. And so they're procuring in advance and building up local stocks, or they're procuring at harvest time and using that to not only diversify their agriculture through growing more nutritious foods, but also improving the market demand for what they're doing. And then finally, under food supply, agricultural R&D. And that's the key of agricultural productivity and very dear to our heart at ACR. The OECD reports that there's been a really dramatic decline in public investment in agricultural R&D since the 80s. There's a whole lot of reasons behind that. but thankfully public investment in agriculture is starting to trend upwards. And in the paper we highlight some of the significant reductions in poverty and also the cost of inputs of production that agricultural R&D can deliver. And the Crawford Fund released a report, I think 2 years ago now, Doing Well by Doing Good, that put a rate of return on for every dollar invested in agricultural research can deliver between $50 and $70 in return. So we know that it's a really good return and it's an area that can really improve agricultural productivity and profitability. Given the complexity of the systems and the effectiveness of policies really depend on the specific context and also the country environment. And so a monitoring approach and doing research on what's actually happening and what the levers that are being pulled are resulting in across a range of sectors is really crucial. And another way of saying that is taking an evidence-based approach. There's a number of examples where we think we're doing something right, and when we go in and look, we find there's a number of odd things happening at the same time. So one area we highlighted under demand was women's empowerment, and I just wanted to end on this. So we know that if we increase a woman's income by $10, it's equivalent to increasing a man's income by $110 in terms of child health and nutrition. And this is because of the different priorities and decisions that women make with regard to men. The World Bank Improving Nutrition Through Multi-Sectorial Approaches report listed 5 different pathways to improve household nutrition, things that you would perfectly agree with: improving macroeconomic growth, increasing income, increasing productivity, consuming more nutrient-dense foods. But the one that showed the most significant impact is empowering women in terms of household nutrition. So this woman here is from Tanzania, and she's part of some research that's been funded through ACR, AusAid and the Food Security Centre over the last 20 years that's looking to improve, to vaccinate chickens against Newcastle disease. Now, a result of this is that the chickens which are traditionally owned by women are actually not dying anymore, and they're building their stocks, and the women are starting to engage in an enterprise and commercial opportunities. They're selling their poultry and they're selling their eggs. Now, the really interesting thing here is with their assets, the returns from their assets, they're actually using those to purchase larger assets, goats and cattle, things that they wouldn't normally have the ability to own in these patriarchal societies. And the fact that they're able to retain their income, the research that we're looking at it's showing great improvements to the economic development of their region, but also the nutrition of their children. So, just to leave you with the key messages, food security is the issue of our time, and feeding the projected population of 9 billion by 2050 is going to be a massive challenge where public policy is going to play a critical role. I mentioned 4 policy areas that can really deliver a high level of returns when it comes to food security. Increasing income and making farming more profitable, stimulating market access and local and then later national economic growth, increasing public investment in agricultural R&D, and empowering women. Food security is a multidimensional problem that requires a multi-sector, coordinated approach to creating the right environment for these sectors to work together. And the effectiveness of policies is greatly influenced by the context and the specific country circumstances. So a monitoring and evidence-based approach is needed to ensure that the policies deliver the impact they were designed to and represent a good allocation of public funds. Thank you.